SFCAHT works to end human trafficking in the San Francisco Bay Area through collaboration, education, advocacy, and protection of all survivors. Right now, over 10 years, our membership has tripled, and you too can become an agency member of SFCAHT. There is absolutely no cost. SFCAHT is really unique in its role as a capacity builder. And we have the ability to convene and inform and mobilize an allied and diverse network of leaders. So it's really an amazing organization, and I'm very proud to be co-chair of this organization along with the amazing Benita Hopkins. I just want to take a moment to thank the amazing team of volunteers, the planning committee, Antonia Levine, right over there. We couldn't have had this conference without her.
We would like to first thank our sponsors, and those are, my computer just died here, Trapman and Sanders, thank you so much. The San Francisco Department of the Status of Women, the National Council of Jewish Women, San Francisco, and the Jewish Coalition to End Human Trafficking. We thank you so dearly. Thank you so much.
Just first, I'll welcome you to the State Building, and just personally thank you for all the amazing work that you do. I know that it's very difficult to take a day off of all the work that you do every day, and you get to be so focused on it. But I'll tell you, you all being here just shows your commitment to this cause to end human trafficking. And I can't imagine a more important cause right now, as we've seen the membership, the interest has been growing, but it's also at a time where we're combating this very awful, awful industry. And really, the only way to stop it is by all of you being here and collaborating, whether it's law enforcement, nonprofit agencies, the city, the state, all various forms of government. It is so important that you're here to collaborate, because we all have the exact same goals. We all have the work that is so important in each and every single day of our lives, but it doesn't really help if we are all rowing in different directions. So by being here today, by making sure that we're all in the same boat, all rowing the same way, I just want to personally say thank you very much for all of the amazing work that you do and for taking the time to collaborate today. Just wanted to, again, just a quick welcome. Let me also just thank Benita and Judge Brill for their amazing leadership of this coalition. I know it takes a lot of time and effort to bring everyone together, but you've done an amazing job, and thank you so much for coming today.
We have received a video address from our fierce leader in Congress, U.S. Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, welcoming our participants to this conference and thanking them for the important work that we all have to do.
Hello everyone. It is a privilege to send my strong support and warm regards to the participants of the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking's 2018 conference. For almost a decade, SFCAHT has acted boldly to fight the abhorrent crime of human trafficking. Trafficking's persistence is an outrage that challenges the conscience of our nation and spurs all of us to greater action, to fight its perpetrators and to support its victims. Unfortunately, the horrors of human trafficking continue to exact a devastating toll among our most vulnerable communities, particularly immigrants, women, and children. Our values demand that we stand as fierce advocates for human rights in the face of oppression and barbarism wherever we find it. Thanks to your energy and activism, SFCAHT's innovative public-private partnership model has helped advance remarkable progress for human rights and human dignity. House Democrats stand with you in this crucial fight, and we share your commitment to ending the tragedy of human trafficking. Thank you all, and best wishes for a successful and productive conference.
Hi again, everyone. I have been asked to introduce our morning keynote speaker,
the Honorable Judge Terry L. Jackson, presiding judge of the City and County of San Francisco. She's been our presiding judge for almost 2 years, and she is honestly one of the best presiding judges the city has ever seen. She is really whip smart. She's an intellectual. In fact, it doesn't even say this on her resume, but she went to some fancy University of London program after college. I know you did. And she's really, really smart. She's articulate. She's thoughtful. She's funny. And she can talk more intelligently about human trafficking than I think just about any presiding judge in the entire state. She is a leader, she's a teacher, she's taught locally and nationally, and she's even taught internationally. She is a professor at Hastings College of the Law, at USF Law School, at San Francisco Law School, and she's won so many awards, ladies and gentlemen, that I have to read some of them. I can't memorize them all. She was the recipient of the California Black Lawyers Judicial Excellence Award, the Charles Houston Bar Association's Pass the Torch Award, the Champion of Diversity Award, the Community Leadership Award. She's the recipient of the Madam C.J. Walker Pioneer Award. She is a voting member of the Judicial Council and was appointed a voting member by our state Chief Justice. I cannot speak about her without, glowing remarks, and I am proud to say she's a colleague, and I'm proud to say she's been a friend of mine for over 30 years. The Honorable Terry L. Jackson.
Okay, I'm very embarrassed by this introduction, needless to say, and I want to thank you very much. When asked to speak today, of course, and I'm going to say Susan Brill, of course, she's Judge Brill, and she's, in my opinion, one of the foremost experts in the area of domestic violence in this nation. So to be introduced by Judge Brill, or Susan, because we go way back, is a tremendous honor. And it's almost, the introduction reminded me very much of my mother being here. She's just always talking and glowing, but I'm not that it's overrated, but I'm just very fortunate, and sometimes I often say very blessed to be here. This area, human trafficking, how I got involved, just going back to the years of being a DA, was really where, I equate myself to being a big Great Dane puppy. I fall into, you're trying to train them, and they really have no sense of direction. They're kind of clumsy, but they fall into this situation, and that's what happened with me years ago, so please bear with me a little bit. When I was an assistant district attorney, I was assigned to a unit called the Sexual Assault Unit, and I was assigned a case where it was a serial rapist in San Francisco, and I can say his name was Richard Lyons. And he preyed upon the most vulnerable women in our society, those who were homeless and those who were in the sex trade, because they didn't have family, they didn't have shelters, and what they perceived was a lack of credibility. And I remember one of the victims, and possibly survivor, I don't know where she is today, but I do remember after the trial receiving a thank you note from her. And she was in prison for another crime. But I remember her when I was trying to prepare the case in my clumsy, it's all about the case, she wanted to tell me her story. I often say we all have a story and we need to share it. And here I was so focused on this case that I wanted to hear the facts about what Richard Lyons had done. But she wanted to tell me her story. And I assumed, clumsily, stupidly, that I knew your story. You're probably a runaway. You probably were involved in drugs. And you got into the sex trade, and at that time, we called them prostitutes, because of circumstances. I'm sorry that you went through it. But she was trying to tell me that she wasn't a runaway. She didn't get into the life of sex trade. She was trying to tell me that she was brought from back east, some little small town on the East Coast. She was groomed along with other little girls. And that she was brought to San Francisco, where she did the San Francisco, the Los Angeles, and the Vegas. It was the triangle in the sex trade. And she was trapped. But I didn't understand that because in 1989, we didn't say things like that. We were still trying to get rid of the young people who were in the sex trade, that they weren't pretty women, you know, from the movie, Richard Gere. That they didn't run away to go into this, but they were trafficked at a very young age. Fast forward, in the DA's office, I was head of the misdemeanor trials, and yes, the calendars were inundated with offenses dealing with sex trade. Always the woman, and they were very young women. And in walks into my office, I'll never forget, there was this inspector named Joe Dudo. He's retired. And Norma Hodling. I don't know if any of you know her. And I didn't know. They just come barreling in my office. Joe stood back and Norma did the talking and saying, we need to have a program. And it's not to persecute the women who are in the sex trade. And I'm learning, what's sex trade? You know, learning those terms. And she was educating me again. That we need to make people, the men who are, or women who are buying, they need to understand. And we started this program, is often referred to as the Johns program. I don't know if any of you ever heard of it. It was the first in the nation, if not the first in the world, because we had judges and prosecutors from all over the world and all over the country to come watch it. And I learned those terms. And hopefully it was there to dispel the myths that you see so often, that the most vulnerable, they're groomed, they're taken from their homes, and they feel they have no other resort. And Norma tried to train me, and I say train, because I look at this as my grandma would say, it's education, it's learning, and it's fighting. This is what you are all about. You're here to educate each other, and me, and judges. I'm here, and we're all here to learn from one another. And we are here taking those skills to fight. And so in that education, learning, and fight, Norma was trying to educate me that it's not just the sex trade. It's in all areas, from employment, it's in the labor, it's in family, it's in dependency. It's just not isolated. And you all know this. And that's why you're here to not only exchange and work together, but you're going to take these skill sets to come train people such as myself. So I will not be the clumsy Great Dane barreling into it. And that our court system will no longer be that clumsy Great Dane. So we as judges understand the importance and how it permeates throughout every aspect of our laws and society. So I'm here to say that I want to continue to be a part of your dialogue. I hope you will accept this Great Dane to be a part of learning. And one of the goals, and I got a call 2 months ago from Judge Brill, and of course she said, Terry, I think that this should be a mandatory training for judges, our new judges. And that, Terry, you know the people over there at the Judicial Council, they're right here in this building. So I called up the head, our executive director for our continuing education, and I said, I think that we need to have this a part of our new judges college and make it a mandatory training, and that's what Judge Brill wants. And she said, well, you know, we've already started our curriculum for 2019, 19, I said, yes, but this is important. And in fact, it should be a training program, not just for new judges. It should be for the entire bench. Because the bench is going to have to understand and be able to recognize when these issues come up in our cases, and they do. And how can we make a decision, do a ruling, or even understand all the facts if you don't understand the background? Just as that woman told me in that holding cell, when I'm there to get that case, I'm trying to get the elements for this charge, I really didn't understand it until you get the whole background and put it in context. That's the only way that this insidious crime can ever end, is that we, not only in law enforcement, not only in the support groups, not only in DA's offices and defense offices, but the court system understands it. So I applaud you all. I thank you for enduring this clumsy person, but I'm here to fight with you. So thank you once again for having me.
And I have the pleasure of working with Norma as the president of the organization that was eventually started, SAGE, Standing Against Global Exploitation, and getting a little bit clumped here because you just, again, woke up that spirit of Norma, and we thank you so much, and of course we thank her for blazing that trail. We are now ready to start, and I think we're set up, right, Antonia, for our first plenary session. And that session is international collaboration to counter human trafficking, and our moderator will be Antonia Levine, and she is the coordinator of the collaborative. And everyone, I just want to point out in the packets that you received when you came in and registered, you should have the biographical information for each of our speakers today. And as you can see, many of them are, in fact, all of them are not only very impressive, but some a little bit lengthy, so I'm not able to necessarily describe in detail everyone's bio, but I certainly hope that you will peruse and digest what you do have in your packet. But I will make an exception, and that is I do want to share out loud a bit about Antonia as she makes her way up here. Antonia, I think everyone in here has had the opportunity and pleasure to at least meet Antonia, be inspired by Antonia, and certainly work with her. She is an attorney with over 20 years experience in criminal prosecution, litigation, and oversight, with a master's in international legal studies and U.S. legal studies from San Francisco Golden Gate University School of Law, and as a public prosecutor and criminal law expert in Europe. She specialized in law enforcement, justice reform, and legislative action in the areas of human rights protection and combating complex crime, including money laundering, corruption, human trafficking, and transactional organized crime. This is an apolitical gathering, but I would think that maybe you're working for Mueller. With law degrees in both the civil and common law legal systems, Antonia is consulted regularly for her comparative and international law expertise and has served on numerous government, UN, and NGO-sponsored projects and panels. She has directly contributed to drafting various pieces of domestic and international legislation, including the European Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings, and served for several years as an appointed expert on the European Union's group of experts on trafficking in human beings. Antonia also contributed to the founding of this collaborative and served for several years on its committees and on the board of directors of the local victim service agency, SAGE, Standing Against Global Exploitation.
In her current positions as NCJW, SF's Executive Director, Coordinator and member of San Francisco Mayor's Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force, Antonia utilizes her legal expertise and project management skills in social justice reform.
For the office of Dimitrio, representing the United Nations Office for Drugs and Crimes. And I really look forward to discussing important issues with him and how the United Nations can be actually helpful in our day-to-day work. And I want to start with just reminding everybody that the United Nations, the home of the United Nations is San Francisco. And even though we are not currently home of the United Nations, we remain the birthplace of this great organization. There is a session going on exactly now in New York. So we still host the United Nations, and we still bring the spirit in San Francisco, and part of our commitment to the work, to the goals of the United Nations is our work on human trafficking. And building this incredible coalition that Judge Brill spoke about and Benita spoke about is also part of the spirit of the United Nations. Can you please speak for all of us a little bit about how you joined the United Nations? What is your background that brought you to this work for the United Nations? And maybe say a few words about the units of the United Nations and how your unit is associated with the anti-trafficking work.
Thank you. It's working, right? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Antonia. Thank you very much indeed for inviting my office and me to attend your conference today. I mean, it's an honor and a privilege for us to be here and to be able to interact with all the people, the professionals, the volunteers that are working in the same area as we do. So I'm looking very much forward to all the discussions and closer. So I'm looking forward to the discussions and the work during this day. My office is based in Vienna, in Europe. I joined the United Nations 10 years ago. Since Antonia asked me to speak about a little bit how it happened. I'm a lawyer by background. Before joining the United Nations, I was working as a lawyer in Greece, in Athens, providing legal assistance and support to asylum seekers and refugees that were claiming asylum in Greece. And I worked in the area of anti-corruption and also in the Office of Internal Investigations. And for the last 4 years, I'm part of this unit of the human trafficking and migrant smuggling section in Vienna. So, I said this section is part of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking persons, which is the first and only global instrument on addressing human trafficking. Was signed in year 2000, entered into force in 2003, and today counts 173 states parties, which is a huge number. We have almost achieved the universal ratification, and this is very important, especially given the transnational, the international manifestations and forms of trafficking in persons, which require a common understanding and a solid basis for common action between the states of origin, transit, and destination. So the protocol gives this basis with the definition of trafficking in persons, which is globally accepted, as I said, and implemented. And our work in Vienna is to precisely work together with the member states and support them in their efforts to implement the protocol or to ratify it, become a party to it if they haven't done so. So this means, first of all, helping states parties to adopt legislation that is in line with the requirements of the treaty, of the protocol, which would allow to prosecute the offenders, to prevent the crime, but most importantly, to put in place frameworks of assistance and protection to victims and survivors. And this legislation is also going to be a basis for international cooperation between states, and in particular when it comes to cooperation in criminal matters, cooperation between police forces, or cooperation between prosecutorial authorities in their efforts to prosecute offenders and investigate the crime. So, as part of our work, we are visiting regularly member states. We are organizing events. We are organizing capacity building activities, targeting mostly the law enforcement officials, prosecutors, and the judiciary, in order to create, a better understanding of the background and of the manifestations of trafficking, because it is indeed a complex crime which requires efforts very often in order to better capture and understand all the nuances, especially regarding the victims.
Antonio, it gives me this idea. You have been very involved in the work of the United Nations in conflict areas affected by conflicts. And we are very concerned in the United States because one of the countries that is impacted by trafficking activities resulting from conflicts is the United States. Can you share with us more about the work of the United Nations in these areas and addressing trafficking resulting from conflicts?
Yes, this is an area that attracted the attention of the international community over the last years, over the last 5 to 6 years, mainly as a reaction to the plight and suffering of Yazidi people and other minorities in Iraq and Syria under the Islamic State. You are, I guess, all aware of the situation of girls that have been abducted, that have been imprisoned, sold, trafficked in horrendous circumstances by the Islamic State, and by the fact, you are also aware of the fact, I guess, that this is a situation that is actually used as a tactic and as a strategy by the Islamic State, as a source of financing their activities, as a driver of recruitment of new fighters, and actually not only by the Islamic State, but also by other groups, armed groups and terrorist groups operating in other areas of the world, like Boko Haram in Nigeria or Al-Shabaab in Somalia, the Lord's Resistance Army in the Great Lakes region in Africa. So, as a reaction to this situation, the United Nations looked into the matter. The Security Council held successive debates on the issue since 2015 and adopted two resolutions requesting action from member states of the United Nations, but also from United Nations entities to address this particular manifestation of trafficking in conflict-affected areas or targeting persons, individuals that are fleeing conflict and for that reason are particularly vulnerable to all sorts of abuse and exploitative practices. So what we did in UNODC in response to this request of the Security Council and in consultation with other UN entities also having mandates to address conflict and trafficking, we developed, first of all, a thematic paper, a publication, looking into the various forms and manifestations of trafficking in conflict situations, so that all the actors, the stakeholders involved can better understand its nature and its linkages with other abuses and crimes, and also collecting a number of good practices of ways to address these different abuses. In addition to this, we have been working in particular states on specific topics. For example, in order to help understand, to help I would say, adopt a method, a way to treat victims of trafficking by armed and terrorist groups. In many cases, armed groups and terrorist groups operating in conflict zones are forcibly recruiting or even abducting men, boys, girls, so that they can join the ranks, and they are forcing them to participate in various roles in their activities, not necessarily as fighters, but also in supportive roles. So this creates an important issue, a question that needs to be answered: how to treat these persons once they have been released from the captivity, once they have been rescued from the armed and terrorist groups. Should they be treated as a threat, as a potential risk due to their association with the armed groups, even if this association was forcible? Or should they be treated as victims of trafficking and helped to reintegrate the communities and to be rehabilitated? So these are issues that we have addressed in working with the particular states in Africa, with the professionals of the criminal justice system and the protection sector there, because these are crucial issues for especially victims of young age that very often are targeted by these types of activities. And of course we continue our work in coordination with other entities in addressing those issues. We have also been developing, for example, with the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, which is responsible for all of the military and police operations deployed in conflict zones, a training module for the police staff in order to train them to understand, to detect and report on situations of trafficking in the different countries that they are deployed to. So as to help the local authorities in their investigative work and in addressing instances of trafficking. These are only a few examples, but I'm very happy to discuss further and answer to your questions.
Yeah, and you have trained also the military forces on human trafficking.
Not the military. This is on the police force, the police forces, the police personnel. We are working on this, and we are going to start in a selected peacekeeping mission in Mali, hopefully by the end of the year. because this is, again, this responds to a request by the Security Council to the UN entities. There was a need identified for all the personnel deployed in the field and coming into contact with situations that could hide trafficking persons, to be able to better understand and to detect those instances.
Thank you. We have many non-profit groups represented, and also government victim service providers, agencies or units of agencies. And it's an old story, but we all look for funds, we all look for resources, for support. And we hope very much that you can speak a little bit more about the role of the United Nations Voluntary Trust Fund for victims of human trafficking and other sources of monetary support, of course, but also maybe to say a few words about the database of UNODC, developing, collecting cases of human trafficking. So please let us know how you can be helpful.
Well, funding is always a big issue, right? And,
Always.
yes, and also for us. I mean, you know, our section in Vienna is composed of 15 to 20 persons in total, the team, and our budget comes for 95% from extra budgetary sources, meaning voluntary contributions of states. So we are working based on this funding to implement projects in all states, states of the world, and I can tell you that resources also for us are very limited. The United Nations Trust Fund is actually a funding mechanism that was established in 2010 by the General Assembly of the United Nations. It is administered by UNODC, and its aim is to provide funding to NGOs and civil society organizations in order for them to pursue their work in the anti-trafficking area, be it in the prevention, the protection of victims, most importantly, but also in the area of judicial processes by providing legal assistance and support to victims who want to, for example, seek a compensation or participate in legal proceedings. I have brochures of describing the activities of the fund. Just to tell you that we have, you can have access to them also online. They are all in our website. Actually, the total amount of funding since 2010 is $4.2 million. We were able to fund projects in more than 40 countries, involving 60 NGOs in the areas that I have mentioned, mostly providing direct assistance and humanitarian assistance to victims of trafficking. We have reached in 2017 a funding level of 1.7 million, which allows the fund to operate satisfactorily. But again, as you can see, the funds are limited. We work in cycles. We have concluded the third cycle of proposals, of calls for proposals recently, and now we are examining the proposals from different NGOs. This time we are focusing on NGOs providing assistance to victims of trafficking in areas affected by conflict or migratory flows. And there is, of course, an opportunity for every NGO, even from the United States. We have, during the first cycle of grants, funded a legal clinic in Los Angeles. That was a case in the United States. But of course, into the next rounds, it is possible for all NGOs to apply and to obtain support. from the trust fund. Another way for us to support activities or to fund activities in anti-trafficking is through the projects that we are implementing. Sometimes some of them involve the granting of small funds to NGOs in a number of countries so that they can advance the work. We are currently having a project, such a project in Morocco. And this is a tool that we have developed, like many other tools we have developed in UNODC, gathering court cases from more than 100 jurisdictions around the world, which aims again at reinforcing the understanding among criminal justice practitioners, but also the general public, of all the forms and manifestations and complexities of trafficking. It is accessible online publicly. I also have some leaflets here that you can have.
Well,
And it's a tool that especially for lawyers, prosecutors, and judges, I think is very very useful and important.
thank you for bringing all these materials. Unfortunately, the time flies and we are over. But I want to let everybody know that Panagiotis will join us in the afternoon outbreaks on international elements, cases with international elements. So if you want to hear more about the resources of the United Nations and ask your personal questions, just chat a little bit with Panagiotis, please come to this workshop in the afternoon. And of course, in the break, you will probably have some business card or information for everybody. Thank you so much again for sharing with us this important information.
So our next plenary session is entitled Priorities in Legal and Law Enforcement Collaboration. And as you can see, we have a very engaging panel of individuals. I just want to make sure that all of our panelists are here. This panel will be moderated by Judge Susan Real, again on the California Superior Court for the City and County of San Francisco. We have with us Alex Say, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of California, Rose McClure, Social Justice and Victims Rights Attorney and founder of Justice at Last, Inc. Daniel Lopez Beltran, Director of Immigration Clinic, the East Bay Community Law Center. Tony Chaplin, our San Francisco Assistant Police Chief, and Patrick Vanier, Deputy District Attorney, Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office. So I will turn it over to our moderator, Judge Brown.
Well, I'm very excited to be the moderator, and this is the Legal and Law Enforcement Collaboration Panel. So we don't just it's so loud that I thought it was working. Okay. So this is the Legal and Law Enforcement Collaboration Panel. And we do have the bios of all our really, really distinguished panel members. But I am going to ask them to give just maybe a one line about each of their organizations. They do a lot. I think all of them have been involved in either forced labor collaborations or cases involving forced labor trafficking or forced sex trafficking, local domestic trafficking, probably international trafficking. Since we have our U.S. Attorney here, they are really a wealth of information We view this panel as really more of an informal discussion on collaborations and a discussion with the audience also. So let's begin with our U.S. Attorney. If you could just maybe give 1 sentence about, your organization, your elevator pitch.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here, and I mean that sincerely. I welcome the opportunity to meet with the community at every opportunity because it's not working. Is it now working? Oh. Okay. I am not a contestant for American Idol, clearly. But anyway, what I was saying is I welcome the opportunity to meet with the community and to talk about very, very important issues. I know I exceeded my 1 sentence. The U.S. Attorney's Office is the chief federal law enforcement officer for the district, the Northern District of California. So we have oversight in prosecuting and enforcing federal criminal laws, as well as protecting citizens through civil litigation as well. And really, we have oversight and coordination authority over all the law enforcement agencies, which is more probably important for this group here. So we work collaboratively with the FBI, Homeland Security, and other federal law enforcement agencies to protect the citizens of the district.
My name is Patrick Van Air. I'm a Deputy District Attorney with the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office. I am the head of our Human Trafficking Initiative from the Santa Clara County DA's Office, and I work collaboratively with law enforcement. I'm assigned to our law enforcement task force that specifically addresses investigations of labor as well as sex trafficking on a human trafficking level, as well as work with community organizations and do outreach and do policy work with different governmental entities. So that is my role. I wear a multitude of hats, and I'm looking forward to talking to you more about the collaborative efforts that we are engaging in Santa Clara County.
Is this, can you hear me on this one? Okay, perfect.
Really close to your mouth.
I'm not going loud. Well, I'm going to channel my inner Melania Trump and steal from the Honorable Judge Terry Jackson real fast. Just simply say we were all clumsy in this process when we started. The San Francisco Police Department holds a pivotal role in human trafficking because arguably the police department is going to be the first line dealing with the victims of human trafficking. So we have the greatest opportunity to help or hurt the situation. So I think it's important for us to sit on this panel as well as get out in the community and let people know that we are here to help. And again, I think that holding that front line, we have a special obligation and responsibility to make sure that we do everything in our powers to make sure that victims are treated as victims in this situation. Again, I know we're short on time. We have a lot to discuss, and it's going to be a robust discussion today. I do hope that we can involve the folks sitting out there in this discussion about collaboration, because I think it's the linchpin for us getting rid of the scourge.
Good morning. Can you hear me all? I'm Rose McCarr, and I'm the founder and executive director of Justice at Last. I'm also the principal attorney. And we're a nonprofit law firm, and we exclusively work with survivors that have been trafficked, whether it's U.S. citizens or foreign nationals, whether it's minors or adults, whether the individual has been sex or labor trafficked, regardless of the gender identity. And I created Justice at Last with the focal point of trying to ensure that survivors are able to achieve justice on their own terms. We're a mobile practice, so we actually go to where the clients are currently getting services. So a big part of the practice that we do is collaboration. We're working closely with safe houses, with service providers, with community-based organizations, and survivor-empowered organizations. And that's how we get the bulk of our referrals for our clients, is collaborating with those service providers. Justice at Last is based on my pro bono practice, and so initially I was working with survivors and trying to figure out what are their legal needs and what can we do to best serve them. And between the work that I did and also doing extensive research with survivor leaders, we determined that there's 4 major gaps that we've seen that survivors are not getting access to in terms of legal support. And so those 4 gaps is what we specialize in at Justice at Last. We do crime victim rights, which is something I'm very passionate about. And that involves when a client or a victim has been identified and they've either been given a subpoena or been asked to provide evidence or testimony against the exploiter. And at that point, we either assert their rights, well, we do assert their rights, but then we also accompany them to any law enforcement interviews that they might have when they go to court and testify. We assert their rights within the courtroom. We ensure that their privacy rights are adhered to. When criminal defense attorneys might actually try to get access to their past, their mental health records, their school records. And we also ensure that restitution, we file for restitution, and not just restitution in terms of what's been lost out of pocket expenses, but ill-gotten gains that the exploiter has received. We ensure that that is shown to the court so they can determine what the proper restitution is. We also do family law because we see that a lot of survivors, while they're being exploited, either have children with the exploiter or they lose custody rights or parental rights during their exploitation. So we ensure that those rights are instilled or that they have access to see their children. We also do vacatur, records clearance, because we also know that victims of human trafficking are often criminalized while they're being trafficked. And then we also do immigration law. And those 4 specializations is what we focus on. We also do general practice law because we see that there's a lot of legal needs that survivors may have that may not actually be part of that trafficking, but occurs after or may have actually occurred prior to, which made them vulnerable. So we're ensuring that they're seeking justice on their terms. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Vania Lopez Beltran. I'm the director of the Immigration Clinic at the East Bay Community Law Center out in Berkeley. We are a clinic affiliated with UC Berkeley School of Law, so we train law students to do the work that we do in the clinic. So it's a little bit of like, think of a teaching hospital model, but for law students to do community legal services. I work in the immigration clinic, so I work with non-citizens to help them secure legal status. We have several other clinics in our office that all of our clients that come in through the immigration clinic can also benefit from. We work closely with our Clean Slate unit. We have a housing unit. We also have a youth education and justice unit, a health and public benefits unit, which has been extremely useful for our clients in being able to access the public benefits that they're eligible for and help them gain more stability. And finally, we have a consumer justice unit that can also be useful for a lot of clients that have been defrauded. In our clinic, we represent people both in affirmative and defensive immigration proceedings, meaning that we might have someone who's never had contact with immigration or is currently not in contact with immigration, and we would help them or represent them in applying affirmatively for some form of relief, which could include a T visa or something of that nature. We also represent individuals who are detained or who are currently in removal proceedings and before an immigration judge.
So I find it interesting that our nonprofit service providers have sat at the very end of the table, and our law enforcement is all here, and this is about collaboration. So let me start with Rose. You mentioned you collaborate with service providers, but do you also collaborate with these folks, with law enforcement, and can you give some examples of that?
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, so one example that I can think of where we were reached out to by the service provider, which is in Alameda County for Missy, and they were working with a client who had been identified as a victim in a trafficking case, but they suspected that she might actually have some outstanding charges in other jurisdictions. So initially, I met the client where she feels safe at the service location for Missy, and they immediately established a rapport and started talking about the actual case, and it turned out that she had several outstanding bench warrants in different jurisdictions and not within Alameda County. So I asserted her rights within Alameda County with the district attorney's office and had a conversation with the deputy DA and the investigator on the case to help identify what the jurisdictions were that we were looking at for outstanding charges for prostitution and solicitation. And from there, I reached out to the public defender's office in Santa Clara County. That was one of the locations where there was an outstanding warrant, and relayed the information that she was a victim of human trafficking and was slated to testify in another case within Alameda County. Connected the public defender with the Alameda County district attorney, and then also looped in the Santa Clara County deputy district attorney as well, so that we were all on the same page, that we knew that she was a victim, that she was slated to testify, and then also that we needed to either get her, well, ideally was to get those charges dismissed. So eventually that was the case once a plea bargain was actually reached within the Alameda County case. And so once that had come to conclusion, we were able to, again, to reconnect with the Santa Clara County DA, the public defender's office, and actually get that dismissed. We were able to replicate those services, or that effort anyway, within San Francisco. We confirmed that there actually would not be pursuing a charge against our client, and we're doing the same thing in different jurisdictions. So initially reaching out with the service provider, and then we also looped in the immigration attorney with the IIBA to confirm. So there was it was kind of like we were the glue almost, to just make sure, like, this was set in motion, but it was really important to make sure that the survivor was kept in the loop which is what was going on, because she didn't know who was who. You know, different people were contacting her, and she had no idea.
Such a great example, and I think maybe that's the definition of collaboration, is glue. And a lot of survivors don't know when they're talking to a lawyer, well, is this the defense attorney, is this the prosecutor, is this a lawyer, is this someone who's going to exploit me further? So for example, when we turn to the East Bay Law Center, I'm imagining that there's a lot of collaboration just in getting those T visas and U visas signed. You want to talk about that?
Yes, so I've been working, before I was at the East Bay Community Law Center, I worked in New York at a nonprofit called Sanctuary for Families, and my focus there, that's an organization that focuses primarily on survivors of gender-based violence. So I worked a lot with survivors of sex trafficking in New York, and then here at the East Bay Community Law Center, I've seen both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. It is a process. So for U visas, you definitely need a certifier. You need law enforcement to certify what's called the Supplement B. Otherwise, you cannot file. So it's completely at the discretion of the law enforcement agency if the client can go forward. So in those processes, it's key to have a very strong relationship with the law enforcement agencies around us and be in constant communication with them about the procedures and protocols. When it comes to the T visa, however, you actually don't need the you don't need to have something signed by the law enforcement agency. There's a couple of ways to go about meeting kind of like the law enforcement cooperation requirement. One is that it has to be reasonable cooperation. So, you know, that depending on the agency, you could say that the law enforcement agency is not being reasonable in their request of the client cooperation. Or you can have that conversation with the law enforcement agency, right, of like what is reasonable to request of someone who's been traumatized, where the trust is really broken, and what that process will look like. And I think it's also key to working with a law enforcement agency, not just for the certification purposes, but also so that the client is safe.
Is it more helpful to get collaboration with law enforcement on a T visa and have law enforcement sign a T visa? Certification form?
It definitely strengthens the application, and if you have a certification signed, but it is not necessary. Sometimes there's a trauma exception as well. So if the client is so traumatized that it is not feasible for them to cooperate with law enforcement, Congress set out an exception for them to be able to, for those particular incidents. And I have had clients that they're so traumatized that being in a room with law enforcement, I had one client actually who kind of hid under the table and started rocking back and forth and was so triggered. And, you know, definitely that is a situation where that client, you know, should be working on stabilizing, receiving mental health services, and it shouldn't be the case that that person cannot be working for towards a T visa during that time. So I think those are specific situations when, you know, you want an exception like that so the client can proceed with the case without having to necessarily go through that kind of very re-traumatizing process. In other places that I've worked very closely with law enforcement, it has been key. The partnership has been key. I could say in one recent case that I had, you know, it was a client who had been forced to sell drugs in San Francisco, and she had, you know, had multiple contacts with the police department and kind of, you know, years had gone on, and eventually she came into contact with a service provider and was connected to services, and kind of after some digging I realized that what the scheme was that was happening, and so I was able to file the application for her, and with her, you know, working with a lot of other service providers. I think Tanya, she's here from Ruby's Place, was working with me on that case. And then also I got law enforcement to work with her to meet with her so that she could kind of go back and recount her story and figure out what kind of, what trafficking ring that was associated with, because USCIS with the initial application was very highly scrutinizing the case. And I think that they definitely, there's certain types of cases that receive higher scrutiny, and I think that cases that involve drug sales are one of those kinds of cases where your client is already deemed to be a bad person, which is really troubling. And so in that case, I actually was able to get a letter from the ADA who worked with me on the case. And I don't think the case would have gotten approved if it wasn't for kind of like, you know, law enforcement vouching for my client and the credibility of the client in that case. So that turned really useful. And in other cases, you know, the collaboration can be a little tense. I think it's important to, like, you know, highlight that and note that in one case I had a minor survivor of sex trafficking case where she was being pressured by the district attorney's office to testify and was, you know, terrified and really scared. And so I think kind of being the representative for that client and having those conversations with, you know, from attorney to attorney makes it a little bit easier, not having the client having to kind of advocate for themselves in the venue where they're not comfortable or the system that they don't necessarily know. And I think in the end that trafficker was prosecuted and sentenced, and, you know, the district attorney's office got the outcome that they wanted, but the client didn't have to testify, which I think was a better experience for her. So I think, you know, we have to play a lot of different roles. Ultimately, in my role, I'm representing the client. I'm making sure that I am helping her access the systems and navigate the systems in the way that is most beneficial to the client. And also, you know, working as a partner with law enforcement in that aspect.
I think those are great examples. It brings to mind a lot of youth I see who are arrested as juveniles for drug sales, and I always think, you know, are these drug sellers or are these survivors of human trafficking who all seem to come from Oakland and live on Avenue, Revolution Avenue is where they tell me they live and they don't have an address. So it brings to mind other cases. And also when I was an assistant DA, I also wrote some of those letters to vouch for undocumented people. So those are great examples. Let me turn to, I like to call him Chief. Your assistant chief, right? Deputy chief? Well, whatever, I call you chief. Can you give us some examples of collaboration?
Well, that was an excellent one, and it kind of dovetails right into one of the things law enforcement had to do, specifically in San Francisco. And for those of you who are in the room who don't know, and I'm sure everybody probably does, Inspector Tony Flores is sitting all the way in the back in a great library suit. He's kind of the go-to person for this thing and kind of spearheaded this. One of the main centerpieces for our work in the police department was a department bulletin that came out at the end of last year, the Department Bulletin 17-249, and it was prioritizing safety for sex workers. And it became hugely important because it addressed those relationships with law enforcement And again, I said this at the beginning, our initial contact generally will dictate how this thing is going to go. And Tony and I were discussing a case just before this in which I think she was 15 years old, young lady stabbed a tourist here, but she was being trafficked. Today, I think she's helped us prosecute five pimps and numerous Johns, and we don't know how that thing's going to end. But Tony went the extra step when the case first came across and checked to see if she was being trafficked, and sure enough, she was. And that's one of the priorities for law enforcement. We've got to start digging deeper and getting to the root of what's going on. And the highlights of this bulletin, and I know we're short on time, so I will be quick. It said guidelines for officers encountering sex workers who are victims of violent crime and or may be subject to arrest, which we talked about earlier. It ensures equal access to sex workers by prioritizing their safety above arresting them for the activities they may have engaged in, and hopefully eliminating the fear of reporting violent crimes that some sex workers are generally subjected to. It also addresses other misconduct against sex workers, which was also viewed as a potential barrier to reporting. Looking as a whole, institutionalize our department's existing prioritization of violent crimes and equal access for our sex workers. Our officers will not arrest a sex worker for involvement in the sex trade when they are the victim or witnesses of sexual assault, human trafficking, stalking, robbery, assault, kidnapping, threats, blackmail, extortion, burglary, or other violent crimes. In addition, our officers shall refer sex workers to community resources and victim services in the district attorney's office. And lastly, it affirms the department's mandate to work collaboratively with the district attorney's office on a training program on sex work and crimes against sex workers. We had a huge case in San Francisco against a young man with the last name of Jeter. And one of the things that came out of that was a toolkit for judges for sex worker cases. And so as this thing evolves and unfurls, we're going to keep learning. And again, we go back to the earlier statement about being clumsy in this process. We get less clumsy the more we collaborate, and the more we share the knowledge, and the more we sit in a room like this and push this thing across, because there are still pockets where people just don't get it. And we have in our department, we're constantly talking to our officers and reinforcing the tenets of the bulletin and making them understand. Don't just look at what's right in front of your face. You have to dig a little deeper. And by the time it crosses Tony's desk, hopefully that's already been done. But he's the second layer of defense. If that was not done in the initial contact by our officers, it is done by that second level of contact. And this bulletin came through with the collaboration with the Department of Status of Women. And I saw her earlier in the news. Dale, can you raise your hand? She's right here in the back. Please give her a round of applause. She helps spearhead. Manoush, I was been assaulted at, and I mentioned your name by Tony Flores, but I was going to mention it anyway. She's done a lot of work, and she was really adamant about pushing this across the table. One of the things for law enforcement that we've done that we historically have not done, there's just not blue suits sitting in the room anymore. We're sitting with a lot of our community workers, a lot of our partner agencies in the city government. We're sitting with the district attorney's office. We're constantly collaborating with everyone around us who has a fingerprint or their DNA is anywhere on these cases, because you absolutely have to. Because if one victim slips through the cracks, then that can unravel this entire network. Because as we know, these folks talk, victims communicate with each other on the streets and through social media. So if this is all viewed as a farce, then it can unravel the entire thread and the fabric that we've all put together through this collaboration. So that's my example, is that department bulletin that goes out to every man and woman working for the San Francisco Police Department.
So in San Francisco, we have a very strong advocacy system with our public defender and our district attorney. And I'm going to turn to our two prosecutors on this side of the table and ask, why is collaboration so important, and how can you get around certain obstacles and roadblocks to collaborating? Let's start with Santa Clara.
Thank you. So, my job is more than just what I do in the courtroom as a prosecutor. It's also what I do outside the courtroom that's important. My assignment as the liaison for human trafficking in our county There are basically four sort of pillars, four responsibilities that I have as the prosecutor. And the foundation for those four pillars is collaboration. So as I mentioned previously, the first is working on policy and partnering with city and county agencies as well as community-based organizations to develop sound policy and protocols so that we can effectively address issues of labor trafficking and sex trafficking in Santa Clara County. Santa Clara County has a human trafficking commission, and it's chaired by our county supervisor, Cindy Chavez, district attorney, my district attorney, Jeff Rosen, also our sheriff, Lori Smith. And with their staff, what we do is we help to develop policy on the county level and help develop protocols and get law enforcement agencies, community-based organizations engaged on the issue of human trafficking. And that's played out over many years. Recently, Santa Clara County implemented or founded the Office of Labor and Standards Enforcement. And this is a recent development within the last month. The DA's office is a partner in that working group to effectively come up with sound policy to address issues of labor trafficking on the county level. And we're engaging our county council, we're engaging local law enforcement, we're engaging the labor and trade union in order to address issues of labor trafficking. And that's just one example of how we are doing outreach and we're engaging members of our community as well as local leaders to effectively address issues of labor trafficking. We also have a very close working relationship with the South Bay Human Trafficking Coalition, the South Bay Coalition to End Human Trafficking. And that's been a partnership that's existed for many years as well. And we're very proud, and the District Attorney's Office is very proud to be part of that, to develop human trafficking protocols for the county, to do outreach to local organizations so they can identify the red flags for when human trafficking may exist and help make report to law enforcement so that we can be first responders and address these issues very quickly. Also, recently, I've been working with County Council on programs to bring local businesses in compliance with SB 1193. And that is a program that allows us to create public posting requirements and allows us to also notify local businesses when they identify red flags for human trafficking. Sort of the second pillar to my responsibility is community outreach and engagement. And I am not just a prosecutor in the courtroom, but I'm also a community prosecutor. And I go out and I do community engagement, I do trainings. In fact, this weekend I'm going to be doing a training for Freedom House and some of their workers in order to help educate on red flags for human trafficking they might see. And so that is important, that collaboration is important because it not only helps us relay information, but it also helps us sort of get feedback from the community on what they're seeing and what we can do in better establishing and sort of formulating our message to the community. The third pillar is obviously investigative work, and one of the things that we're very proud of several years ago is that we helped establish with our community partners the Law Enforcement Investigate Human Trafficking Task Force, or our LIGHT Task Force. And as the prosecutor assigned that task force, I'm embedded with 6 investigators that work specifically on labor and sex trafficking cases. And by being embedded with these investigators, I can work with them and help get legal processes in place to help effectively investigate these cases. For example, search warrants, put GPS trackers on vehicles or in phones so that we can monitor individuals who are suspects of human trafficking and help put our cases together, conduct meaningful surveillance. Also, as embedded with these investigators, I can help them do strategic planning on investigations and in the right situations, maybe implement and obtain a wiretap so that we can go after large-scale criminal organizations that are engaged in human trafficking, which happens to be my wheelhouse. Over the last 10 years, I've been assigned to the narcotics prosecution team, and we've used wiretaps to effectively infiltrate organized crime gangs and cartels that are engaging in not just drug trafficking, but they diversify and they also engage in human trafficking. So I'm very excited about using technology like this to help infiltrate these organizations and dismantle them. And lastly, I am a prosecutor. I go in the courtroom, I carry a heavy caseload. And what's very important about effectively prosecuting these cases is the collaboration that we do with our social workers and advocates and attorneys that help provide services to the victims. If we don't have victims that can come to court and testify, then we don't have a case that we can prosecute. And it is the collaboration and the outreach with the community-based organizations, the social workers, the advocates, and the attorneys that provide the important services like e-visas and T-visas, that if we can't get the services in place for our most vulnerable victims, homeless, transient, individuals with substance abuse issues, mental health issues, and immigration issues, if we can't address those issues, then we will fail when we get the case in court because we will not be able to get our victims in court and have them testify and effectively make it. So the foundation, the bedrock to all four pillars of the job that I do is contingent upon effective collaboration.
Alex, have you had any successes or challenges working with the federal defense bar in your collaborations on trafficking cases?
So yes, we have had challenges, but I will say that the federal approach to human trafficking is victim-centered, trauma-informed. Most of the federal cases that come our way, human trafficking, it really is an offshoot of a larger organized crime conspiracy case, and there's a trafficking component because of the coercion element to the victims. And it becomes a big part of the case, but of course the case also may fall on the human trafficking side if we don't have the cooperation and the support of the victims. It's not uncommon for cases to drop the human trafficking component because of that. So we're very sensitive to that particular issue and have to work with all aspects of the community, the defense bar, and in order to make sure that the victim component is shored up. The primary collaboration probably occurs with the FBI as our primary law enforcement agency, and the squads are organized accordingly, and they have great special agents that are trained in human trafficking. Our office also has a victim witness group where people during the investigations are constantly in connection with the victims and making sure that they're supported, and if they need social services, they can get directed accordingly. The prosecutor spends much of the time making sure they have the evidence for the case. You know, certain prosecutors have more experience and therefore they can be more conversant in issues. But we're noticing in human trafficking, you know, it's not just all sorts of things come into play. Cultural backgrounds become very important in these cases. Understanding the dynamics of the family become very important. And these are all things that people have to be educated on. It's not something you necessarily read in law school, but it's something that the prosecutor has to get trained on to be sensitive to those issues so that they can spot them as they approach in putting together the case. I think the greatest benefit to collaboration is that it's really the trust aspect of the collaboration. That really we can be forced to sit in a room and we have a united outcome, which is to prosecute crime. But if we really don't have the trust component with everybody sitting in that room, then we're not likely to reach the outcome as easily as we could. And that trust part of it takes more than just, you know, one-time meetings. It requires historic kind of proof that things will work in a certain way. And that is something that I continue to work at, which is to show not only commitment, but to show it in the proof of having the outcome and how we can collaborate, but have that trust part of it be front and center.
Have you ever had a criminal defense attorney or a nonprofit group bring you a case of human trafficking?
Not to me, but I am aware that definitely does happen, certainly with the public defenders where they bring to us instances where their clients they believe have been trafficked.
And do you have a vision for a better model of collaboration?
That's a good question. From my perch, I think the challenge is the trust part. And now I have to speak not on behalf of the department, but speaking as the U.S. Attorney for the district. I have to do outreach, I have to speak to the community, and sometimes it is a challenge when the rhetoric from beyond gets in the way, and it's my job to show commitment to the law. And I will say that the department, again, we need to be judged for who we do, what we do, and how we prosecute. But the Deputy Attorney General in November 2017 articulated to the community, said to the law enforcement community, that human trafficking is a priority. So I take that charge seriously, and that is something that we do prosecute accordingly. But it is something that we not only say those words, but we have to earn the trust of the community. So if I could envision a better model, it is one in which we have an opportunity to prove that we are trustworthy partners in combating this crime.
Thank you, so eloquently said.